The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
As our audience for sure knows, we've been on the don't panic train when it comes to Ebola. But one of the very specific things that we've discussed that has not, up until this point, really been mentioned in detail by the CDC and by corporate media is the possibility of contagion, as we know, based on the fact that Ebola is contagious through bodily fluids, of standing a few feet from someone, they sneeze, and of course, the mucus globules or droplets go into the air, and you could be a few feet away and you could breathe that in. These could be very, very small and barely noticeable. And in my mind, that was a risk for contagion. The CDC now agrees. They've updated their latest documents and actually put out a PDF which says, quote, "Droplet spread happens when germs traveling inside droplets that are coughed or sneezed from a sick person enter the eyes, nose, or mouth of another person. Droplets travel short distances, less than 3 feet from one person to another. A person might get infected by touching a surface or object that has germs on it and then touching their mouth or nose. Droplet spread diseases include plague and Ebola." Now, the CDC has always maintained that if you're 3 feet from someone, that you would not be at risk of catching Ebola. I think 3 feet, Lewis, if someone does sneeze and they have Ebola and they're symptomatic, okay? So I'm being a very, very precise here in terms of the scenario I'm outlining. Even if you were 4 or 5 feet away, you could still conceivably, if it's outdoors, if there's wind, if it's as the subway door is closing or opening, who knows, you could still hypothetically catch it this way.
Yeah, this 3 feet rule seems like it shouldn't exist. It just sounds like a pretty stupid way to try and keep people calm. Clearly, if you sneeze and there's a little gust of wind or something, it could carry that droplet, those germs, farther than 3 feet.
Of course. And again, this is not in any way to make people afraid. It is merely as a commentary about the fact that from the beginning, I outlined this specific scenario, and we were not really getting clarity on it from many officials and from certainly not from corporate media. But I am still just shocked by the amount of panic around this. Yesterday, I'm in a soccer league now that plays on Tuesday nights, and last night at the game, 2 of the people on my team were saying we should be having mandatory quarantines. Everybody who comes back should be forced to stay in some kind of observation tent like that woman was. And I had to very calmly explain to them about the New York City doctor who did not act irresponsibly, and about why medical experts are saying the mandatory quarantine of all people who have been in the area may not only be ineffective, it may be straight up illegal. And as I calmly talk to people, I can see in their eyes, Lewis, that they do start to understand it.
That's good. I mean, it's, I don't think it's one of those issues that's so polarized that you can't talk sense into people who think, that everyone should be quarantined. But I mean, it's just, as we can see, it's just not necessary. Looking at the Dallas situation, I mean, it seems resolved now. And of course, you still don't like to hear that this can be transmitted by someone sneezing next to you.
Let's talk a little bit about spying and the Patriot Act. There's this provision that was put into the Patriot Act originally, which was called a sneak and peek delayed warrant. And the goal of including this in the Patriot Act was specifically for situations related to terrorism. So this is the scenario that was drawn up as kind of the reason to have the ability to have a sneak and peek delayed warrant. You suspect someone is involved in terrorist activity, but tipping them off to the fact that you're investigating them might make them either act more quickly or it might make them destroy evidence. So this provision says if there is a suspected terrorist or someone who you want to investigate, you can go in and do a sneak and peek to their home or electronically. And this can include taking pictures, smelling, taking measurements, looking at computer files, etc. And only afterwards must they be notified that there was this delayed warrant and that they were sneaked and peeked against. Now, let's be very, very clear. We were told this was for terrorism, but we now have a new report from the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which found, after reviewing reports that were released by the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, that only 51 sneak and peek requests during 2013 were actually for terrorism. Now you might say, well, David, 51 out of how many? 51 out of 11,129 total requests. Lewis, if you had to guess, it's not terrorism. What are these sneak and peek delayed warrant requests actually being used to investigate?
Drugs?
Absolutely. Absolutely spot on, Lewis. The numbers, this is a quote from Mark Jacqui at the EFF. The numbers vindicate privacy advocates who urged Congress to shelve this section during the Patriot Act debates. Proponents of this section claimed sneak and peek warrants were needed to protect against terrorism, but just like we've seen elsewhere, these claims were false. Yet another way, Lewis, in which the eagerness of the American people post 9/11 to accept almost anything that might even have a small chance of keeping them safer, understandably, we're not criticizing anyone for this, has been used to prop up and further the failed, pathetic, and embarrassing war on drugs. There is a direct connection now that we can see between 9/11 through the Patriot Act into the war on drugs and the incarceration of nonviolent drug offenders. This is so embarrassing.
And I bet right now there are a lot of people in Canada that are looking at this situation and thinking to themselves, we can't let this happen up here.
I hope they are, because as we talked about, Prime Minister Stephen Harper in Canada in the wake of the Ottawa shooting, which tragically did lead to a casualty, they are now trying to fast track the expansion of spying powers and police powers. Just look at what happened here. Lies about the number of thwarted terror attacks, a 99% usage that is not terrorism related of a provision that was meant specifically to fight terror. They should be paying very close attention, Lewis, to these reports.
Definitely. I have a hard time imagining the exact same type of legislation happening in Canada, but you never know.
Pope Francis has been really making waves with regard to more moderate statements that he's made about science, about contraception, about homosexuality. Now, I get it. It's still the Pope. It's still the Catholic Church. There are limits here, but there are more than 1 billion Catholics on this planet. And I think it's really important when the Pope does something that really is a departure from what has been a really quite retrograde and completely unprogressive stature from the standpoint from the church on so many issues. And the Pope is now going even further. Speaking at the Pontifical Academy of Science, Pope Francis declared, number 1, the theory of evolution is real. Number 2, the Big Bang is real. And number 3, that God is not a magician with a magic wand, going on to say that we need to put an end to what he called pseudo-theories of creationism, I'm sorry, let me put it a different way. He said we need to recognize that the Big Bang and evolution are real things, and this, according to many experts, felt like the putting an end to the literal interpretations of things like creationism and intelligent design. And Pope Francis explained that both of the theories are not incompatible with the existence of a creator. So here's where he really does go back into religious doctrine, right? Which is, okay, the Big Bang is real, evolution is real, but it was God who set the process going and kind of created the ingredients, right? And this is something that is not completely unheard of in slightly more moderate religious circles. And you'd be completely right in saying that that is completely not backed by science. But I still maintain, Lewis, given the fact that we have over 1 billion Catholics on this planet, that this is a significant thing for the Pope to be saying so directly.
It's incredibly significant. His words do carry a lot of weight for a lot of people. I've been saying for years that believing in God and accepting, believing in evolution, that those things are not mutually exclusive. You can certainly believe in both, and it's perfectly reasonable. And I'm glad that the Pope is trying to find some middle ground here.
This is a step, right? I mean, if you think about the major religions and you think about kind of where is the midpoint in terms of belief from a completely science-based perspective to a completely biblical or sacred text-based perspective, merely by saying this, the Pope is moving the mean of all of these beliefs, if you imagine this on a sort of timeline, slightly towards the science side. And I think that that's a positive thing.
It's a positive thing. What we need to avoid is just people believing in a literal interpretation of their religious text, because that's just absurd.
So next week we do have a midterm election, and regardless of what actually happens in the Senate and in the House, there's a really interesting story that's kind of an underlying issue within the broader electorate of the United States. In southern states like Georgia, Kentucky, which in the past would have been easy Republican victories, the races are actually tighter than many people would expect. And the reason which many are indicating is the explanation for this reality is that we're seeing a shift away from religion, particularly from millennials. In every region of the country, in every single Christian denomination, you are seeing either stagnant or declining membership. And meanwhile, the number of people who consider themselves unaffiliated religiously, this could be an atheist, this could be an agnostic, this could be someone who's simply indifferent to religion, it could be someone who follows their own kind of spirituality, but it's not tied to a specific religion. That group is growing significantly every single election cycle. And this is happening even in the Deep South. Even in the Deep South, that Republican base of white evangelical Christians is shrinking. In Arkansas, in Georgia, in Kentucky, the decline has been in the double-digit percentage points, which is hugely significant. So the driver of this is young people. We're seeing demographic turnover. There's sometimes the false notion from people, Lewis, that as you age, you become more conservative. And this isn't true. It's true that if you group people into quintiles, for example, by age, the oldest quintile is typically the most religious and the youngest is the least religious. But this isn't because people become more religious. It's because each generation is being replaced by one that is less religious. And this, combined with the increased Hispanic population, does not bode well at all for a party that has relied overwhelmingly on white Christian men to vote for them.
Yeah, as we move forward, religion is going to be, part of the discussion less and less, and that's a good thing. And I think we talked about a study where the older you get, the more your beliefs, the more you become deeply rooted in your whatever beliefs you held before. So if you start off conservative, you become more conservative. But if you start off liberal, you become more liberal.
If you start off less religious, certainly, I assume for the most part, you don't become more religious. And the correct response
Some people will,
of course, anecdotally. The correct response from Republicans would be, let's moderate our positions in order to appeal to a broader base. No, instead they're trying to pass voter suppression laws. Instead, they're trying to say on corporate media, corporate right-wing media, young women might be just too dumb to vote, they should stay home. This is the wrong tactic, and I hope and believe that it is absolutely going to backfire. We'll take a break. We have a very unique example of Hatriot Mail today. You're not going to want to miss this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show membership program is made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Some statistics do suggest the economy is improving in spite of having a Democratic president, but those statistics obviously are liberally biased. Find out more at liberalbias.com. Today's new member of the day is Kelly Marr. Kelly, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Kelly and get access to the bonus show, the commercial-free TV show, the commercial-free podcast feed, the David Pakman Show town halls, and all of the other great member benefits by going to davidpakman.com/membership. And remember, if you shop on Amazon, you can support our show by first going to davidpakman.com and clicking on the Amazon banner before you shop. It is Wednesday, and it is time for a very special and different Hatriot Mail.
Between waving a Gadsden's flag from a highway overpass to drafting George Zimmerman for a 2016 run, a patriot has little time for anything else. But when that annoying little dweeb, David Pakman, really pushes the liberal envelope beyond what a God-fearing teabagger can bear, there's Hatriot Mail. Your brief respite from the unending deluge of liberal bias.
So normally, as you know, Hatriot Mail is someone has written in and our narrator, our voiceover artist, reads that Hatriot Mail. Today, we actually have a first. This is an actual Hatriot voicemail from the Hatriot himself. It is a man in this particular case. So we are actually going to play this is not an interpretation of an email that was written. This is the voicemail. We have it transcribed, obviously, so we will put up the text for our television audience. This is pretty crazy. I'm warning you. Let's take a listen.
Yes, David and Lewis. This is Frank from Monroe, Georgia. Normally I watch your insignificant show because it humors me. I want to know what the enemies of the Republic are doing. Yourself, Tom Hartman, Amy Goodman, Papantonio, the rest of your schmucks. I get done watching other liberals at work because I work at a prison. And most criminals are liberals, of course.
Of course.
But anyway, I got a little angry tonight, just a little. You out there trashing two people who I have the utmost respect for, from the political satire and information world, Michael Savage. And you out there with your little boyhood bluff from some sissy that you probably got this information that you really don't have, because I don't think you have it. And I know if you did, Michael would come after you to go out there and say it. But you're scared, and you're bluffing. Michael Savage has shitted out more knowledge than you have in your liberal little punk-ass body. And that includes your gay boyfriend, Lewis, too.
Right.
An Argentinian and a Muslim, Iranian. And then you go after Dave Ramsey. Let me tell you something, you little schmuck. The man gives sound advice. It's real simple. Make more than what you spend. It's called a budget, you bonehead. But I know liberals don't believe in budgets. We know that. That's why we have $18+ trillion of national debt right now. A third of that, approximately, because I know you're trying to quote my stats, approximately of that has been totally on the back of Mr. Obama.
Right.
Barack Hussein Obama. A third of the debt of the whole country from the whole time is on this one man. Yeah. For you and that little schmuck boyfriend of yours to go and say some vile things about, you know what, Michael Savage, he should rip in the people, because conservatives, as we a lot of times, we just put up with your bullshit and we just tolerate it. But you know what, there's times when you need to be confronted, you need a bloody nose.
We need a bloody nose. Lewis, what do you make of this? As usual, two references to Lewis being my boyfriend. It's the same ad hominem nonsense.
I'd like to congratulate this man for being the first man on Mars. That's quite an accomplishment. This is exactly what I'd picture someone who worships Michael Savage sounding like.
Yeah.
He can't form arguments. He has to stoop to insults, and he finishes it off after all that talk about breaking the law by claiming that he wants to break the law by assaulting you.
Yeah, so his solution to all this, of course, is to give somebody a bloody nose. A very special Hatriot Mail, a true Hatriot, Lewis. And next week, we will return to our regularly scheduled, professionally narrated Hatriotism, rest assured.
Very good. Yes, that was an incredible one, one that deserved to be played in its purest form.
According to George P. Bush, yes, there are more George Bushes, Jeb Bush, the brother of former President George W. Bush, the son of former President George H.W. Bush, it's insane that this is even the explanation for this story, is moving forward on 2016. George P. Bush told ABC's This Week that his father is, quote, still assessing a presidential bid, but said it would be more likely that he would try to be president this time around. The ex-governor did not run for president in 2012. Quote, I think it's more than likely that he's giving this a serious thought and moving forward, said the younger Bush, who is currently running for Texas Land Commissioner. There's always another George Bush not too far behind. Jeb Bush would probably stand out in some ways in the 2016 field. He has a certainly more moderate view on immigration. He has a Hispanic wife. On the one hand, this would make him more appealing to some moderates. On the other hand, it would make him completely unappealing in many ways to the Republican base. Here's one of those weird conundrums, Lewis. I would prefer Jeb Bush not run, because I think he'd be one of the Republicans that might have the best chance of winning nationally. At the same time, if I knew that a Republican had to win, I might prefer it to be Jeb Bush, given who the field is at this point. Complicated situation here with Jeb.
Exactly. If it had to be a Republican, he wouldn't be the worst option. And assuming he wins the primary, Republicans are still going to pick him just because he's a Republican over whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Yeah, it's really a question of whether he can get through a Republican primary.
Yeah, and you know what? I think he could. I think he'd have the corporate backing. I think he could win some of those minority votes.
Having another Bush in the White House would make this country such a political laughingstock.
These things come in threes, don't they?
Yeah, they certainly seem to. Hey, Ben Spencer from Australia wrote to me, and he says that they have an Australian Sarah Palin. I think you're really going to like this. I want to introduce to you someone who I can only describe as the Australian Sarah Palin. This is Palmer United Party Senator Jacqui Lambie from Tasmania. She's been in the Australian Army. She has a lot to say. She wants a $3,400 fine to be imposed under a new law for anyone who is wearing a Muslim head covering, face covering, or face coverings of any kind. She says that this would ban all full face coverings unless you have a reasonable excuse. Her legislation doesn't say what a reasonable excuse would be. Also reminiscent of Sarah Palin. She tossed together such an epic word salad when she was asked, what is Sharia law? This is kind of a simple question for someone who's an anti-Muslim crusader. You'd think she would have an answer. This is what Senator Jacqui Lambie, Australian Sarah Palin, as I'm calling her, had to say.
What do you understand Sharia law to mean?
Well, I think when it comes to Sharia law, to me, it obviously involves terrorism. It involves a power that is not a healthy power.
In what way does it involve terrorism?
Well, I just think that, Sharia law, you get it mixed up in, it does. If you're going to be a supporter of Sharia law and you're not going to support our Constitution and allegiance to our Constitution and Australian law, then,
But they're not saying they don't support the Constitution. Sharia law is it's a religious framework, but Muslims in Australia, the moderate Muslims, don't follow the extreme tenets of Sharia law in the same way that Christians don't take literally some of the violence that's inherent in the Old Testament.
Yes, but I still think, they have that extremist when it comes to Sharia law, and that's not good for the country whatsoever.
Why?
Just a brutal assault, Lewis, on the English language there.
It's fantastic. I think Sarah Palin would be hard-pressed to top that.
I'm as against Sharia law as anybody, but this is just completely embarrassing. She's also worried about Muslims using Ebola to do suicide contagion of Ebola. People infecting themselves, Muslims infecting themselves with Ebola, and then spreading it to others. Check this out.
If I could ask a supplementary on Ebola, if that's okay.
Ebola, yes, certainly, Senator Lambie.
Mr. Chair. Do you have any information to suggest that Australia's enemies could attack our country or military using the virus? For example, with suicide agents who are affected with the disease or have access to bodily fluids containing the disease? And what is your contingency plan to fight this?
Well, I don't believe there is any evidence to suggest that is a likely course of action. One of the things, Senator
Lewis, this would be one of the most inefficient and slowest ways to kill a huge number of people. And the member of the military there said, well, we have no evidence at all that this is a risk, but she doesn't care. This is the narrative she's pushing. We found her, Lewis, the Australian Sarah Palin.
I'm sorry Australia has to deal with this, but I am really enjoying this. It's just great to know that these types of people exist elsewhere and that we're not the only ones that have to deal with it.
No, it is in a way. I mean, of course, we have Christine O'Donnell and Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin, and then of course that's just a few of the women. We and Joni Ernst, who grew up castrating hogs, and of course we have people like Pat Robertson and Rick Santorum and Dick Cheney and Karl Rove, and we have all these people. I get it, but sometimes it is nice to know that it does exist elsewhere too.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we don't wish this upon anybody, but that it's not purely an American problem is kind of nice.
All right, we have a great interview coming up for you. Make sure to go to our David Pakman Show Reddit by going to davidpakman.com/Reddit. That's REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Tansy Hoskins, who's an activist and author of Stitched Up, the Anti-Capitalist Book of Fashion, which is a critical look at the practices of the modern fashion industry. I want to start first with globalization and exploitation, which are two things you talk about in the book. People probably in the US and the UK have a general understanding when they hear those terms that, sweatshop labor, child labor, but that may be as far as their understanding of exploitation and globalization go. There's much more to it than that, isn't there?
Yes, there certainly is. I mean, if you take a country like Bangladesh, globalization has meant the destruction of local traditional industries like fishing and farming, which has driven huge migration into the capital city, Dhaka, and into other sort of industrial hubs. So it's an entire process. And I guess, it's not just sort of the goods that we see traveling around the world. You also get migration of people going all around the world. So there's a great deal with globalization, and you get enormous globalized corporations which are acting globally. So borders don't play the role that they used to play. So capital is. You can have a country based in London. It can be doing its manufacturing in Bangladesh, and then it could be selling in the United States. But what we don't have at the moment, and what's a big problem in the fashion industry, is a lack of. There's no global legislation to go with that to protect people, and we're only just seeing the rise of global trade unions to try and ameliorate some of these processes.
Yeah, it's similar to what's happening, in fact, with internet law in many cases, where because you have things taking place on the internet in kind of the abstract sense that cross country lines, it can be hard to legislate in a way that both makes sense based on how the internet is actually used, but also takes into consideration the kind of multinational impacts of what is happening on the internet. And similarly, when we have a situation where an American company, presumably American company, is sourcing their clothes from other countries where the labor practices may well be legal in that country, albeit unethical, how do you create a system of law that takes that into consideration, given that the eventual vendor of the clothing is in the United States, where those practices would be illegal?
Yeah. Companies are responsible and legally responsible for their supply chain, because they are the ultimate factor in that supply chain. They have the ultimate control over things like wages and environmental protection and all the standards. So you have to, I'd like to see there being legislation about goods that come into the UK, like clothes that come into the UK, and a much more transparent set of supply chains as well.
There's a movement here in the US, and I don't know if it also exists in the UK, which is that of produce locally, right? And sometimes the defenders of the globalized apparel status quo, so to speak, will say, well, if you think that American apparel white t-shirt is expensive now, just wait until it's produced here in the United States paying US minimum wages. How would you respond to someone who defends the status quo with that type of argument?
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not in favour of pitting, workers in Bangladesh against workers in Britain or America. I mean, we've seen in Britain and indeed in America the gradual running down of manufacturing. Britain used to be a huge manufacturing hub, as did America, and successive governments have had a deliberate policy of running that down, and that's certainly true for the garment industry. And the key reason why companies don't manufacture in Britain and in America is because of wages. So I mean, I would like to see wages rise across Asia. I mean, in favour of the Asia, living wage campaigns and the Asia floor wage that try and create a minimum standard for the production of all of our goods.
There's another kind of layer to this that for me only exacerbates the problems with the wages that are being paid to the workers in many of these countries. And maybe people don't know this. The margins on individual clothing items are just huge. I mean, people may not know that a luxury handbag sells for 10 to 12 times what it costs to produce. We're talking about 1,000 or 1,200% markup. I mean, many dresses and shirts are selling for exponentially more than what the cost is to produce. And this, to me, only further infuriates me in terms of not only are the workers being swindled, and maybe that it's actually worse than being swindled, but the buyers are also paying a price that makes no sense whatsoever, and somehow the market is bearing that price.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's like you're getting exploitation both at the point of production and at the point of consumption, with prices being quite so high. But on the sort of positive side, as it were, there have been various studies that have shown that in order to double wages for garment workers, all you'd have to do is increase the price of say a dress by between 1% and 3%.
And this is amazing because you would only have to increase absurdly inflated prices by 1% to 3%. To double the wages that are being paid. It's incredible, isn't it?
It is incredible, and it just shows just how greedy these corporations are. Companies like Burberry, which are billion dollar companies, or Marks and Spencer's that makes over £600 million in profit every single year, and yet they won't pay a living wage either in Bangladesh or in the shops as well, in places like in London here.
I would actually be much less offended by the prices that are charged by the companies if I knew that they valued the employees in a way that they really redistributed the profits to those employees in a significant way. In other words, I just don't want both being absurdly, embarrassingly overcharged for items I know cost a couple of dollars to produce, and knowing that the majority of that money is not going to the workers.
Yeah, no, I mean, yes, I mean, I completely agree. It just shows, where the priorities of these companies are, which is, not with the people that are making them these gigantic profits.
What clothing buying practices can the average person learn that can at least mitigate how much they're exacerbating this problem? And I word it that way because if you're buying clothing, it's difficult to not be a part of the problem at all, to completely remove yourself. But what advice can you give to people?
Well, I mean, I like personally in the work that I do, I encourage people not just to think of themselves as consumers, and I encourage people to think of the action that they do and the help, and the sort of solidarity that they show with garment workers, not to be, when they're in the shops. I don't think you can change the system we live in by shopping differently, and I don't think we can buy the kind of justice that we all want to see. So I'm much more concerned with getting people involved in, like trade union solidarity campaigns, and in picketing and pressurizing big corporations like Walmart and Gap, who have refused to even sign the Bangladesh Accord on building and fire safety. I mean, I think if you've got if you've got a choice between two different garments and you can afford to make that choice, then of course make the choice that's least harmful to people and planet. But for many people, there's not a great deal of choice involved in what they buy, and I think those people have the right to be involved in changing the world as well.
I'll remind our audience the book is Stitched Up, the Anti-Capitalist Book of Fashion. We've been speaking with the book's author, Tansy Hoskins. Great to have you on. Really a great topic and something I think it's important for people to know about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Houston police are investigating yet another accidental shooting. This time the perpetrator was a 3-year-old kid. 20-year-old Patrick Sanders was shot after a gun fell out of his pocket while he was napping and landed in the hands of a 3-year-old kid, according to the Houston Press blogs. Investigators say that Sanders was just sleeping on a couch Saturday morning when the gun fell to the floor. As he awoke, the 3-year-old boy had picked up the gun. He apparently tried to reach for the gun. It wasn't clear whether the kid had his finger on the trigger and Sanders hit the finger as he lunged for the gun, or exactly what it was that happened. But the 3-year-old shot the 20-year-old Sanders. The kid was not injured during the incident. Sanders was transported to a local hospital. He was listed in critical condition. Not clear at all whether he is the father of the 3-year-old based on the reports we read. On the plus side, at least the kid didn't put the gun in his mouth while the 20-year-old was sleeping.
I'm glad the kid didn't get hurt. And this is clearly just another responsible gun owner, right?
Well, maybe the problem, Lewis, is, according to gun groups, maybe they would look at this and say, the kid is 3 years old. Why hasn't he already gone through an NRA-sponsored gun safety class so that this wouldn't happen? It would have made him a good guy with a gun. We aren't supposed to be bowing down to liberal bias, which doesn't let kids who are 3 have gun safety classes.
Or the kid could have been possessed by the devil. I think the moral of the story here is you need to always have 2 guns on you at one time. That way, this man could have shot the kid before the kid shot him.
If you're going to go to sleep with a gun, you should actually go to sleep with 2 guns in case one of them falls out or someone takes it while you're sleeping. You would still have 1 gun left to defend yourselves. But on second thought, someone could actually take both guns while you're sleeping. So you probably actually need 3 guns whenever you take a nap.
Why stop there? Let's just go to 4 or 5. You can just tape them to various parts of your body.
I got an email from Justin about Reagan Book. Reagan Book was this alternative, a conservative alternative to Facebook. Justin said, I randomly thought I would check in and see how ReaganBook.com was doing, as I found the concept quite amusing when you reported on it a while back. It turns out that ReaganBook.com is now FreedomBook.com. It would be interesting to know the story of why this change came about. Was it legal issues? So over the summer, this religious activist named Janet Porter launched Reagan Book, and the idea was it would compete with Facebook. It would be a right-wing alternative. It got flooded with trolls and satirical accounts and ended up shutting down. And now it has reopened as Freedom Book, and Freedom Book is Facebook for patriots. Right now, it's only allowing in people with invitations, so they figured out a way to simultaneously keep trolls out and prevent it from having any potential of success at any point in the future. It has 4 members right now. One of them is Janet Porter herself. The others are somebody named Todd Barnett, someone named Troy Newman, and a 4th member named Oleg Atbashian. Ladies and gentlemen, please work on infiltrating Freedom Book for us. I think it would be fantastic.
Yeah, let the trolling begin. I think this is going to be a complete disaster one way or another. Either it's going to get completely flooded by trolls, or it's going to have 10 members and be completely obsolete.
It's interesting to me also that there's such a desire for an alternative to Facebook, as if Facebook is such a liberal thing. And I know Facebook has gotten some heat from the bigoted right because they list more than just male and female as gender options, and they list more than just in a relationship or married. They have LGBT options for your marital status, and the right wing absolutely hates this. But think about Facebook for a little bit. What's so liberal about Facebook? They have created a news feed that doesn't actually show you stuff based on what your friends are posting, but it basically filters and decides and censors and shows you only what it determines that you should see. It's completely tied in where there are advertisements that show up on Facebook based on the websites that you visited, a complete violation of people's privacy, according to some people. They are working with government agencies in so many different capacities that are certainly at least authoritarian-esque. Why is there even this pretense that Facebook is this ultra-liberal thing that we need to get away from?
I think something about the sharing of information is just considered liberal or socialist or bad. Maybe that's it.
We have a voicemail number. It is 219-2-DAVID-P. A lot of emails asking about the David Pakman Show calendar. I showed it on the bonus show yesterday. I'm holding it up now. This is the 2015 David Pakman Show Hatriot Mail calendar. Next week, we will have information on how to get these, and we will have some great membership specials starting. People are going crazy over this thing, Lewis. I had no idea that this was going to be of such interest.
Yeah, last night David had to fend off a mob with that calendar when he was assaulted. Yeah, it's incredible.
And of course, we do have voicemails to play for you. Here is one. Let's take a listen.
Hey, David. I just saw your video interview on Lee Harvey Oswald's lover, says Oswald was framed for killing JFK. And honestly, I find it morally repugnant that you would even consider allowing someone with a clear mental illness onto your show, just to gain AdSense revenue for YouTube and to get more views or whatever. You shouldn't do that. She's clearly suffering from chemical imbalance in the brain, probably has paranoid schizophrenia. So please, don't do that anymore. Thanks.
Yeah, listen, we didn't go out and just find some nut who we know to be mentally ill and book them on the show. This was pitched to us by a book publisher that pitches us many books. She has been interviewed in many shows. We did not go out looking to victimize someone who you believe to be mentally ill. Of course, I don't believe any of what she said about Lee Harvey Oswald and the JFK assassination. It is not my job to analyze her psychiatrically. This was an individual, Lewis, that was pitched to us by a publicist, and we interviewed the author of a published book.
Right, and we also don't really have any concrete evidence, on whether or not she's mentally ill. Maybe she's just someone who likes a good story and kind of fabricated this. Who knows?
On today's bonus show, the FTC sues AT&T over throttling unlimited data users, the Birmingham police brutality lawsuit resolution, and Walmart's fat girl costumes. This is just amazing that this is now a thing, Lewis. Lewis will tell us all of those stories and more on today's bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership is how you sign up. If you're a new viewer or listener to our program, I know there have been a significant number of new audience members over the last week because of some of the interviews that we've done. This is member-supported media. We have no huge corporate sponsors or media conglomerates that fund this program. We depend on you. So please consider investing. I call it an investment. A few bucks a month, what you might spend on one of those lattes at one of those cool coffee shops in our show. Go to davidpakman.com/membership to sign up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.